"Step away from the door, ma'am. This doesn't concern you." The voice was sharp, like the snap of a gavel, meant to end the moment before it truly began. But Arielle Thomas didn't flinch. She stood tall in the doorway of her modest apartment, hands steady, eyes locked on the icy agent who had just grabbed her neighbor. His grip on Tiana Graves wasn't just firm, it was forceful, deliberate, as if he needed to prove something not only to her, but to himself. "This concerns me the moment you lay hands on a mother who hasn't broken a single law," Arielle said, her voice steady, but laced with heat. The hallway buzzed with tension. Nia, Tiana's 7-year-old daughter, sobbed quietly behind her mother, clutching a teddy bear as if it could shield her from the nightmare unfolding around her. One of the agents shifted uncomfortably, maybe from the weight of the stairs, maybe from the sudden realization that this woman, the one standing in their path, wasn't just some nosy neighbor. "I'm her attorney," Arielle continued. "And unless you've got a judicial warrant with her name and a judge's signature, you're violating federal guidelines, state laws, and common decency." Her words didn't shake. But the agents did. Because they weren't prepared for her. They weren't prepared for the storm. An hour earlier, the world had been quiet. It was barely 6:45 a.m. when Arielle had padded into her kitchen, barefoot on the cold tile floor, hair wrapped in a satin scarf. She had just poured her first cup of coffee when she noticed the dark SUVs idling outside her complex. The engines were running low, almost humming, and their tinted windows reflected the pale dawn light like black mirrors. She didn't need to see the jackets to know who they were. The posture. The formation. The way they scanned the building like a hunting ground. It wasn't the first time Arielle had witnessed this. But it was the first time it came this close, just across the hall. They were at Tiana's door. Tiana Graves had never missed rent. Never caused trouble. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning medical offices at night and baking for the weekend farmers market. Her daughter, Nia, was quiet and curious, always drawing on the concrete steps with colored chalk. They had lived across from Arielle for 3 years, and not once had anything like this happened. Until now. The knock on the door wasn't even loud. It was confident, measured, the kind of knock that didn't expect to be ignored. Then came the demand, immigration enforcement. "Open up." Arielle had dropped her mug in the sink without even thinking. It cracked but didn't shatter. Her phone was already in her hand as she flung open her own front door, stepping into the hallway just in time to see one agent grab Tiana by the wrist. "What are you doing?" Arielle asked, her tone cutting straight through the hallway silence. The taller agent, broad-shouldered, shaved head, an arrogant tilt to his jaw, stepped between Arielle and Tiana. "Stay inside," he barked, raising one hand like she was a nuisance. "She's my client," Arielle said sharply, ignoring the order. "This is unlawful detainment. Let her go. She's undocumented. She's subject to removal. She's a mother. She has a pending asylum case. She has rights," Arielle countered. "And unless that paper you're holding is signed by a judge, not your field supervisor, this is a violation of her due process." The second agent looked at his partner nervously. The hallway was too tight. Too exposed. And Arielle wasn't backing down. "You think you can get in our way just because you've got a law degree?" the taller one hissed. "I'm not in your way," Arielle said calmly. "I'm standing exactly where I need to be. Between her and an abuse of power." Behind them, Tiana was trembling. She hadn't spoken. Her eyes were wide, fixed on her daughter, who was now crying so hard her tiny shoulders shook. Nia had dropped her teddy bear and reached for her mother, wrapping her arms tightly around her waist. "Mama, please don't go," she whispered over and over again. Arielle turned to Tiana slowly, keeping her movements deliberate. "Tiana, do not say anything to them. Not a single word. You are protected under the law. You hear me?" Tiana nodded, lips pressed shut, tears streaking down her face. The taller icy agent growled something under his breath and stepped back. He reached for his radio, muttering fast, probably asking for guidance now that their ambush had turned into a public standoff. "We'll be back," the shorter one finally said. "With the proper documents." "You make sure they're signed by a judge this time," Arielle said, her voice unwavering. The agents retreated with stiff steps. No apologies. No eye contact. Just the uncomfortable shuffle of men realizing they weren't above accountability after all. Once the SUVs pulled away, Arielle turned to Tiana and Nia. The hallway felt smaller now, like the walls had witnessed something sacred. Tiana crumbled. Her knees gave out and she dropped to the floor, clutching her daughter with everything she had left. Nia's sobs softened into hiccups, muffled by her mother's shoulder. Arielle knelt beside them, one arm around Tiana, the other gently brushing Nia's hair. She didn't say, "It's going to be okay." Because right now, it wasn't. Instead, she whispered, "You're safe, for now. But we're not done. They picked the wrong hallway today." And in that moment, with two neighbors clinging to each other in shared silence, Arielle Thomas didn't just feel like an attorney. She felt like a wall. And she swore she wouldn't let that wall crack, not today, not ever. By the time the sun had fully broken through the morning haze, the entire building knew what had happened. Word spread fast in neighborhoods like this, where windows stayed cracked and neighbors passed updates through whispers across stairwells. People pretended to mind their own business, but they watched everything. And on that day, they had watched Arielle Thomas stand down two federal agents without so much as raising her voice. That kind of thing didn't go unnoticed. But Arielle didn't have time for praise. She had barely made it to her office that afternoon when the first message came through. An email, unsigned, sent from a scrambled address. No subject. No greeting. Just 5 words typed in bold. "You're next. Mind your place." She stared at it for a long moment, heart still calm, but not unaffected. These kinds of messages weren't new to her. As a black woman practicing immigration law in a country growing increasingly hostile to both her skin and her client's citizenship status, she had learned to live with shadows. But this one felt different. It wasn't vague. It wasn't a general threat. It was direct, personal, timed perfectly to the morning's confrontation. She closed the laptop and stood by the window, staring down at the street below. It was a normal Tuesday on the outside. Traffic, a man unloading crates from a delivery truck, someone walking their dog. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. There was a chill in the air that had nothing to do with weather. That same afternoon, her office phone rang. She answered with her usual calm professionalism. "Arielle Thomas, Thomas Law Group." A deep male voice spoke slowly. "You're interfering with federal enforcement. Keep it up, and you'll find yourself disbarred." She didn't respond immediately. She allowed the silence to stretch long enough to let him feel it. "Is this how you operate now?" she finally asked. "Anonymous intimidation instead of due process?" The caller hung up without another word. Arielle placed the phone down gently, then walked to the file cabinet and pulled out Tiana's case folder. The documents were thick, almost a year of filings, correspondence, background checks, affidavits. Everything was clean. No red flags. No missed deadlines. Just the kind of slow, painful hope that came with being caught in an immigration backlog designed to crush people under paperwork. She flipped to the latest status update. Her appeal had been acknowledged. No denial. No warrant. Nothing that gave ICE any lawful reason to arrive unannounced at 6 a.m. with handcuffs in hand and fear in their eyes. Something wasn't right. And Arielle's instincts, honed by years of courtroom battles and late-night advocacy work, told her that this was bigger than one case. That evening, as the sky dimmed and the streetlights blinked on, she returned home to find a piece of paper wedged into her doorframe. It wasn't folded. It wasn't addressed. Just a black and white printout of her bar association profile, circled in red ink. 3 words were scribbled beneath it. "You protect them?" She stared at it for a long moment before removing it, folding it carefully, and sliding it into her kitchen drawer. Not because she was scared, but because she knew how these games worked. Whoever was doing this didn't want her dead. They wanted her quiet. They wanted her to think twice before speaking up the next time an undocumented mother was dragged out of her home in front of her child. But they had made a grave mistake. They had made it personal. The next morning, Arielle walked into her firm's weekly legal clinic with fire in her chest. She greeted the receptionist with a nod and headed straight for the community conference room, where a line of undocumented residents already sat clutching folders, paperwork, and trembling hope. She didn't sugarcoat her words. She never had. "Some of you heard about what happened at my apartment complex yesterday," she began. "Let me be clear. ICE showed up without a judicial warrant. That means what they did was not just unethical, it was unlawful." Murmurs rippled through the room. A woman in the back clutched her son tighter. A man 2 rows up looked down at his hands, ashamed. "But we're not going to be paralyzed by fear," Arielle continued. "We are going to organize. We are going to document everything. And most importantly, we are going to make noise. They don't get to operate in silence anymore." She spent the next 4 hours reviewing files, filing emergency motions, and helping draft Know Your Rights flyers in both English and Spanish. She was exhausted, but focused, until her paralegal, Deshaun, walked in holding his phone. "You need to see this," he said quietly, handing it to her. It was a video. Cell phone footage, grainy but clear. A neighbor must have recorded the confrontation from their apartment window. The clip had already been shared on Twitter, gaining thousands of retweets in less than an hour. The caption read, "Black immigration lawyer stops ICE from snatching her neighbor at dawn. This is what real courage looks like." Arielle watched as her own image played on the screen, shoulders squared, voice calm but commanding, standing between federal agents and a terrified mother. She watched herself tell them, "Bring a judge next time." She heard the agent's silence. She saw Tiana's trembling form in the background and Nia's terrified cries. Her throat tightened. It was surreal watching herself from the outside, not because she didn't recognize the woman in the video, but because so many others finally would. The story had taken on a life of its own. She had lit a match that couldn't be unstruck. By the time she left the office that night, her inbox was flooded with interview requests, support messages, and hate mail. It all came bundled together, admiration and attack, applause and threats. But one message stood out. It was from a woman in Mississippi. A grandmother. "My son was taken last year. No warning. No lawyer. I couldn't fight for him. But after watching you, I remembered what fighting looks like. Thank you." Arielle sat in her car for a long time before turning the key. She looked out over the city, its glowing windows, its loud silence, its jagged systems built to punish the wrong people. And she whispered, not as a lawyer, not as a fighter, but as a woman unwilling to disappear, "I'm not done." The first sign came quietly, too quietly to notice at first. On Thursday morning, Arielle Thomas returned from a client meeting to find a neon orange slip taped to her apartment door. It was thin, no larger than a sticky note, but its message landed like a slap. Notice of lease violation, immediate compliance required. She stared at it for several seconds, rereading the vague phrasing. According to the note, she had disrupted the peace of the building and created a hostile environment for other tenants. Disrupted the peace? She clenched her jaw, peeled the paper from her door, and went inside. The apartment was still, the kind of quiet that allowed your thoughts to stretch out too far. She dropped the slip on the kitchen counter and walked to her balcony, looking out across the courtyard. 2 maintenance workers were hosing down the pavement. A woman with a stroller passed by, avoiding her gaze. No one waved. No one smiled. 2 days ago, neighbors had called her a hero. Today, she was the problem. The shift was subtle but calculated. Later that day, her building manager, a red-faced man named Mr. Connolly, called her into the office. He didn't bother to hide his frustration. "You've brought media attention to this property," he said, tapping a clipboard with a stubby finger. "People are uncomfortable. This isn't the kind of publicity we want." "Is it the truth that makes them uncomfortable?" He ignored the question. "There are rules in place. Tenants are expected to avoid conflict, maintain a low profile. It's in the lease." "So speaking to IC is now a lease violation?" "I'm not debating policy, Ms. Thomas," he said curtly. "I'm warning you. Keep your business out of this building, or we'll have to reassess your tenancy." She said nothing. She didn't need to. The warning was clear. She had stepped out of line. And the system, quiet, relentless, invisible, had already started correcting her. By Friday, Her inbox had tripled in size. Most messages were supportive, lawyers across the country offering solidarity, parents sending thanks, even students inspired by her courage. But woven between the praise were threats that felt far too specific. One message included her law school graduation photo, cropped and defaced with the words, "Traitor to your kind." Another one came with her office's exact GPS coordinates and a message. "If you really cared about this country, you'd leave it like they should." Arielle reported the worst of them. Filed documentation. Forwarded screenshots. But deep down, she knew how the game worked. Hate was rarely punished. It was tolerated, absorbed, until it metastasized into policy. Into silence. And still, she showed up. At her desk. In court. In the homes of families who hadn't slept since the raid. But the real betrayal came from the place she least expected, the Bar Association. A letter arrived in a plain white envelope. No email. No call. Just a folded paper that began with 7 words she had never imagined would apply to her. "We are opening an ethics investigation." She read the letter slowly, every sentence colder than the last. According to the board, Arielle's public confrontation with federal agents may have violated professional conduct standards by drawing attention to an active case. It was nonsense. Paper-thin logic wrapped in bureaucracy. But it was dangerous. Because even the suggestion of misconduct could taint her license. Even the implication that she was reckless could be used against her, by IC, by opposing counsel, by anyone who wanted her quiet. She sank into her chair, the letter resting in her lap like a weight. This wasn't just about Tiana anymore. It wasn't just about Nia's tear-streaked face or the agent's abuse of power. It was about silencing the voice that had spoken up. About making Arielle an example to others. This is what happens when you push back. That night, she sat across from Tiana at her kitchen table. The apartment was quiet. Nia was asleep on the couch, curled under a fuzzy blanket, breathing steady and soft. Tiana looked tired. Not just from lack of sleep, but from living too long in survival mode. She stirred her tea, eyes fixed on the swirl of steam. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You risked everything for me." Arielle shook her head gently. "This isn't about thanks. It's about justice." "I keep thinking about how fast it happened," Tiana said. "How they knocked once and pushed in. Like they'd done it 100 times before." "They probably had," Arielle replied, her voice low. "And most times, no one was there to stop them." Tiana looked up. Her eyes were wet but steady. "You were." Arielle reached across the table and placed her hand over Tiana's. "We don't run from this," she said softly. "We build something from it." The next morning, the local paper ran an article titled, "Lawyer or Activist? Debate swirls around icy confrontation." They had used a still from the video, the moment where Arielle stood in the hallway, arm extended, shielding Tiana and her daughter. But the article questioned her motives, quoted anonymous sources from the property management team, and questioned whether she had endangered her client's legal standing by speaking to IC agents so directly. The framing was subtle but dangerous. It planted doubt. It cast her as emotional, unprofessional, even reckless. Arielle read it all the way through, then folded the paper and tossed it into the recycling bin. She wasn't angry. She was prepared. Because what she had done wasn't reckless. It was necessary. And the more they tried to box her in, as a troublemaker, a radical, a liability, the more people saw her for what she truly was. A line in the sand. That afternoon, she received a call from a national civil rights organization. They had seen the video. They wanted to meet. They were forming a coalition. "We believe this could be bigger," the woman on the other end said. "What they did to Tiana wasn't isolated. It's part of a pattern. And we think you could help us prove it." Arielle didn't hesitate. "Tell me when and where." As she hung up, her phone buzzed again. This time, with a voicemail from an unknown number. She pressed play. "You think you're untouchable. But people like you always fall eventually." She didn't even flinch. She saved the message. Then she opened a new document on her laptop. At the top, she typed, "Affidavit, ICE raid patterns in low-income black communities." She wasn't falling. She was rising. And the higher she climbed, the more the system would tremble. For the first time in weeks, Arielle Thomas sat on a stage beneath bright lights, flanked by national organizers and civil rights attorneys who had spent decades fighting the very battles she now found herself in. The event was being broadcast live across multiple platforms, with media crews, community leaders, and immigration advocates packed into the conference room. Arielle was calm, but it was the kind of calm built from exhaustion and resolve, not ease. She leaned into the microphone and spoke with deliberate precision. What happened to Tiana Graves was not an anomaly. It was the result of unchecked power, of weaponized immigration policy used to target Black and brown families living below the radar. But I am here to tell you, those days of quiet compliance are over. A standing ovation followed. Dozens of phones filmed her every word. Supporters online lit up the comment sections, calling her a modern-day warrior, a new voice in the fight for humane reform. Someone even dubbed her the Reluctant Shield, a nickname that stuck fast. But not everyone in the room was clapping. Across the country, the pushback had already begun, right-wing outlets labeling her an activist lawyer with a political agenda. Anonymous blog posts appeared overnight questioning her legitimacy, her professionalism, even her motives. They picked apart her tone, her posture, and of course, her race. As if being an unapologetically Black woman was somehow the most offensive thing she had done. Still, Arielle pressed forward. She filed a formal ethics complaint against the IC agents who had targeted Tiana. She worked with the Civil Rights Coalition to build a case highlighting illegal entry patterns into apartments with predominantly non-white tenants. She began speaking at universities, community centers, even churches. Momentum was on her side. But momentum, she would soon learn, has a cost. One Tuesday morning, her paralegal Deshaun knocked gently on her door. "You need to see this," he said, holding up his tablet. It was an exposé posted by a local tabloid. The headline read, "Revealed, Arielle Thomas once arrested in college protest turned violent." Below it was a grainy black and white image, her mugshot from nearly a decade ago, eyes defiant but young, face framed in a halo of natural hair. The article spun the incident out of proportion, describing the protest as a near riot and claiming she had incited chaos outside a government building. She sat back slowly, feeling the weight of years she had tried to leave behind crawl up her spine. That protest had been her first real act of defiance, a campus sit-in against police brutality after the killing of an unarmed Black teenager. She had been 21, angry, and unwilling to stay silent. The charges were dropped. There had been no violence from her. No convictions. But facts rarely mattered when narratives were easier to bend. "They're trying to smear you," Deshaun said, pacing now. "Make you look unstable. Radical. Like you've always been a problem." Arielle said nothing for a long moment. Then, softly, "Because in their eyes, I have always been a problem." She took a breath and turned toward the window. "I knew something like this would come," she added. "They couldn't refute the law, so now they're attacking the person who wields it." Within 24 hours, the smear piece had been picked up by multiple fringe sites. A podcast episode titled, "The Dark Past of the IC Interrupter," was trending on conservative YouTube. Her phone rang constantly, some calls of support, but many filled with threats and hate. That night, as she sat curled on the couch with a case file in her lap, her mother called. "You holding up, baby?" her mother asked, her voice always warm, always grounding. "They're dragging up the mugshot from college," Arielle replied. "Trying to use it to discredit everything I've done since." Her mother sighed softly. "Let them talk. Let them dig. Just remember, what they uncover is their fear. Fear of a woman who knows how to fight back." Arielle closed her eyes. "I never wanted to be the face of a movement. I just didn't want to watch Tiana disappear." "That's exactly why you are the face, Arielle," her mother said gently. "Because you didn't chase it. You lived it." A few days later, Arielle agreed to do an exclusive interview with a prominent Black journalist, someone she trusted to handle her story with care. The sit-down was raw, honest. She spoke openly about the college protest, the dropped charges, the years that followed. I wasn't perfect, she said on camera. I was passionate. I was loud. I believed that silence was complicity, and I still do. If standing up got me arrested at 21, I don't regret it. Because it taught me exactly what I needed to know about the system I now fight inside of. The interview aired during prime time and went viral. Suddenly, the smear campaign backfired. Young activists flooded social media with the hashtag #IStandWithArielle. Photos of her mugshot were reclaimed and turned into posters, digital art, even t-shirts. Her past didn't weaken her, it humanized her. It showed the fight had always been in her, long before she passed the bar exam. But the pressure didn't let up. 2 IC agents showed up at her law firm a week later, not to arrest anyone, but to ask questions about some of her asylum clients. The visit was thinly veiled intimidation. They lingered too long, spoke too loudly, made sure every employee in the building knew who they were. Arielle met them in the lobby, her spine like steel. If you have questions about my clients, you can send them to my inbox like any other legal inquiry, she said. Otherwise, you're loitering. They left, but not before one of them smirked and said, "Not every lawyer gets to play hero forever." As they stepped into the elevator, Arielle turned to Deshawn, who stood watching, fists clenched. "They want to break you," he said. "They can't," she replied. "Not unless I let them." That night, as the city outside pulsed with neon lights and honking traffic, Arielle sat alone in her office and opened a blank legal pad. She didn't draft a defense. She wrote a manifesto. A declaration for those who would come after her, for every young woman who might one day face the same crossroads. It began with the same line she had told Tiana weeks ago. "You are protected. You are not alone." And as she signed her name at the bottom of the page, she no longer felt like she was merely reacting. She was building something permanent, something they couldn't silence. Not with fear, not with mugshots, not even with power. The courtroom was still, eerily so. Rows of polished benches stretched behind Arielle Thomas, filled with anxious faces, news crews, and members of the immigrant families she had fought to protect. Tiana Graves sat just 2 rows back, fingers interlocked tightly, as if holding on would keep her from being swept away again. Beside her, Nia's wide eyes stared toward the judge's bench, too young to fully grasp the weight of what was unfolding, yet somehow old enough to sense its importance. At the front of the room stood Arielle, her black suit crisp, her notes resting on the desk before her, untouched. She didn't need them. What she was about to say couldn't be found in documents. It had been written across the hallways of her apartment, in the silence of late-night threats, in the tears of families nearly torn apart without warning. The opposing counsel, a stone-faced government attorney in a gray tie, barely acknowledged her presence. To him, she was just another overzealous defense attorney trying to grandstand. But Judge Kimberly Reyes was different. A Latina woman with sharp eyes and a mind that cut deeper than any gavel, she had a reputation for asking hard questions, and not backing down. "Ms. Thomas," Judge Reyes said, adjusting her glasses. "You may proceed with your argument." Arielle stood slowly, her heels echoing against the tile like the beginning of a march. She turned toward the judge, then glanced back, just briefly, at Tiana and Nia. She drew her breath, steady and low. "This isn't just about a misstep in policy," she began. "It's about a system that weaponizes silence. A system that enters homes without a warrant, that detains mothers without explanation, and that expects the people it targets to remain too afraid to speak." Her voice did not waver. It did not rise. It carved through the silence like a scalpel. "I represent Tiana Graves, a woman with a pending asylum case who was detained without legal grounds. I represent the thousands like her, whose names don't trend, who don't make headlines until they disappear. And I'm not just standing here as her attorney. I'm standing here as a citizen of this country asking, demanding, that we stop pretending this is normal." Judge Reyes leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. The weight in the room grew heavier. "The government claims the agents followed protocol," Arielle continued, pacing slightly. "That their intentions were benign. But I have affidavits. I have body cam footage obtained through FOIA requests. I have neighborhood reports showing a pattern of racial profiling and warrantless entries in predominantly black and immigrant housing complexes, targeted not because of crime, but because of visibility. She paused, then held up a stack of signed witness statements. This is not one isolated event. This is a strategy. And it has been allowed to thrive in the shadows because people fear the price of speaking out. A soft murmur rippled through the gallery, quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. Arielle continued, this time looking directly at the ICE attorneys. I was told I was unprofessional for confronting agents, that I overstepped. But let me ask this, when a mother is being dragged away in front of her child without cause, what exactly is the professional thing to do? Stand by and hope someone else does something? Or risk your comfort for someone else's freedom? Her words hung in the air. Powerful. Unapologetic. Because if integrity means staying quiet while injustice happens, then I want no part of that version of integrity. She returned to her seat, her heartbeat loud in her ears, but her face calm. Across the room, a woman wiped tears from her eyes. The courtroom had become more than a legal battleground. It had become a reckoning. The judge recessed for deliberation. For 3 long hours, they waited. Outside the courthouse, protesters and supporters gathered. News trucks rolled in. Students held signs that read, "Fight for families," and "Black immigrants matter." Inside, Tiana sat gripping Arielle's hand. They didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Everything now depended on a decision that had taken months to reach this far, but could still disappear in seconds. Finally, the judge returned. Her face gave nothing away. She took her seat and adjusted the microphone before her. In the matter of Graves versus United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement, she said, this court finds that the actions taken on the morning in question did, in fact, violate the 4th and 5th Amendments of the United States Constitution. Gasps filled the room. Tiana broke down silently, tears streaming as she clutched her daughter. Arielle didn't move. She closed her eyes, exhaled slowly, and let the verdict settle in. Judge Reyes continued, this court rules that the detention of Ms. Graves was unlawful, her rights were infringed upon, and ICE agents failed to meet the legal requirements for entry, detainment, or interrogation. Then came the part no one expected. In addition, I am recommending an internal review of all operations conducted in the state under the current ICE regional directive, specifically targeting demographic patterns of enforcement. It is the court's opinion that this case reflects broader systemic issues worthy of further legal and legislative scrutiny. It was not just a win for Tiana. It was a win that echoed. Across policy. Across practice. Across every hallway that had ever fallen silent out of fear. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Microphones pointed like arrows. But Arielle said little. She didn't need to repeat herself. The truth had already spoken. That evening, she walked Tiana and Nia back to their apartment. The same hallway. The same front door. But it felt different now. Safer, somehow. Nia tugged on Arielle's sleeve. Are they gonna come back? She asked, eyes wide. Arielle knelt down beside her, placing a hand on the child's shoulder. They won't get that close again, she said softly. Not while I'm here. And she meant it. Weeks later, as the buzz faded and cameras moved on, Arielle sat alone on her balcony. The city skyline shimmered in the distance. The noise had quieted, but the fire hadn't dimmed. She opened her laptop and began typing an op-ed. This isn't just about immigration. It's about dignity. It's about who gets to feel safe inside their home. It's about how many families have to be broken before we recognize that silence serves the oppressor, not the people. She paused. Then added a new line. If you saw what happened and it made you angry, good. But don't stop at anger. Let it take root. Let it move you. She posted the article. Within hours, it began to spread. Shared by influencers. Picked up by national outlets. Quoted in classrooms. Used in activist toolkits. Arielle had become more than a name in a headline. She had become a mirror. A reminder that behind every policy was a person. And behind every person, a story waiting to be defended. If this story moved you, if it made you pause and ask hard questions, Don't let it end with a scroll. Talk about it. With your friends. With your family. With the people who never thought this kind of thing happens. Because it does. It happens in plain sight. And it continues when we stay silent. But silence isn't the only option. We can speak. We can show up. We can be like Arielle. If you believe more people need to hear stories like this, real stories from real communities that don't get movie deals, then let your voice carry this one further. Like this video. Share it. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that matter. And drop your thoughts in the comments, especially the uncomfortable ones. Because discomfort, if you sit with it long enough, can become change. And change? It always starts when someone says, "You don't get to erase me."